Good evening, if indeed that's when you're hearing this. In these unusual times, we have the opportunity to time shift and often have lost much of our normal daily and weekly patterns. For much of last summer, I would hear components of the pre-recorded services and the evening thoughts during the previous week when we were preparing them for the Sunday. It's been a pretty steep learning curve, with several changes along the way. But I do trust that we've been able to provide something that's been an encouragement to those who watch, some of whom might not come into a church building. Some 6 or 7 years ago, when I decided to look for a church in Aberdeen, it was Christmas and I felt it less unusual for a stranger to attend. I knew a few people at Hebron and thought I would try there first before looking at other nearby churches. The building was a little unusual at the time. We were still using the side hall while the main building was refurbished, but I was overwhelmed by the welcome I received. The Bible teaching was of very high quality, and I quickly decided that I didn't need to look any further afield, and I was soon exploring the way to become a member and more involved here. But I've jumped ahead in my story, bringing you the parts that some of you know already before giving you the beginning. But let me start by reading Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an enemy encamp around me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing I have asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger. Or you who have been my help, cast me not off. Forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path, because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. David reminds us of the faithfulness of a God in whom we can put our trust. We are reminded that things happen in God's time and of the need to wait. Patience can be difficult at times. I was brought up in the south of England and went to the local church with my mother. I don't remember much about the first village church, but at 8 we moved region and started going to a nearby Methodist church. I went through the various classes in the Sunday school, hearing Bible stories and being involved in a variety of activities. However, this remained a discrete part of my week on Sundays, perhaps with a little blurring with the local scout troop. My secondary school was on the opposite side of town, and I don't recall there being much overlap between groups of friends. I persisted with church, but perhaps I was just trying to please my mother. I don't think any of it became personal to me at this stage. As for many, a big change came when I went away to university. That was some 100 miles from home, so it was an opportunity for some independence, as well as pursuing the first steps on my chosen career of medicine. I found myself in a hall with several Christians, and they took time to explore the true meaning of Christianity with me. And I quickly realized that I was not yet a Christian. For some months I wrestled with an academic approach to faith. Needless to say, I was unable to prove anything to my own satisfaction. But I certainly wasn't going to be pushed into anything by people in the CU or the Navigators, however well-meaning they were. I reached a point where I realized my choice was to make a step of faith and accept Christ into my life, or not. It was the end of the spring term of that first year. I was on my own in hall. Most people had already gone home earlier that day. That evening, I took that step of faith and knew, however incomplete my understanding was at the time, I knew of my need for forgiveness and that Christ had died for me personally. A great sense of calm came over me, but there was no one to tell. This was before mobile phones and email. Let me read again in Hebrews 10. Let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So a few days later, I was home for the Easter holidays. I went back to my mother's church, and I think they and she were quite encouraging. It was the following term before I was with friends and what became my local church for the next 4 years. Although that was a good few years ago and several moves, I'm still in touch with folks from there. Over those following 4 years, the fellowship and teaching in both the local church and the university CU formed a foundation to my understanding and development of my faith. There was quite a mix between a variety of churches in the CU, but it was good to know that we had so much in common, even though there were differences in expression and in liturgy. I spent several months in my senior clinical years down in Plymouth and found a local church there, so that when I returned to work there after graduation, I was already known and knew people, and I was able to become more involved. Church was no longer just a Sunday thing. We spent time together, and I'm sure we were able to spur one another on. Again, some of those friendships have lasted. Postgraduate medical training was more fragmentary in those days than it is now. There were fewer linked programs. I was always willing to move for the next appropriate post and worked in Sheffield and Gloucester before coming to Aberdeen. I did find each successive move harder to become established in a new community. When I initially came to Aberdeen, I was only here for a few months before spending 15 months, I think it was, working abroad. And I didn't put down many roots. But came back, and at that stage, the attraction of the local hills made it difficult to become committed to a local church and spend much time on a Sunday with people. The Mountaineering Club provided friendship, but little or no spiritual support. On increasingly rare visits to a church, I never seemed to get beyond "good to see you, are you new here" sort of conversations. It was probably the failing health of my parents and realising that I was a distance from existing Christian friends, all of whom were still in England, that highlighted my need to return to a local church fellowship. And that's where this story started today. Preparing for this reminds me of the people who've been an encouragement over the years. Some won't even know that they were doing so. I'm reminded of the need to reach out to people at times of change. In my case, it was starting at university and later the death of a parent. In particular, I remain grateful to those fellow students at university. And I know many of you are aware of the important role of the CU relay workers and the staff workers and the challenges that they have faced this past year. I hope we can all continue to spur one another on towards love and good deeds, even when we may not realise that we're having a positive effect. Thank you for listening. These thoughts and the preceding recordings are all available to listen to through the church website. But thanks also for the notes of appreciation to the tech team. They've been an encouragement to us. I think we'll be continuing with some form of broadcast service for some time to come, although I do hope we can return to having limited congregation soon. Good evening.